Thank you very much. Maia Bellon is our speaker. She is the director of the Department of Ecology statewide. She was appointed by Governor Jay Inslee in February 2013. But she's not a sort of new face at ecology, because she was a deputy and then a manager of the Water Resource Program for Ecology. And while there, she helped sustainably manage the state's water resources for communities, farms, forests, and fish. She served for 15 years as Assistant Attorney General, focusing on complex water law and a broad array of other environmental legal issues. She was also a special assistant to the president of Evergreen State College for Civil Rights and Legal Affairs. As a Mescalero Apache descendant, Maia is the first Native American to lead an executive cabinet agency in Washington State. She did graduate from Evergreen State College and got her law degree from Arizona State University. As Director of Ecology, she is known for forging creative partnerships and is committed to innovative solutions for the most controversial environmental challenges we face today. So it's my pleasure, and please join me in welcoming Maia Bellon.
Thank you so much for having me today. That was a wonderful introduction, and really excited to be here. Now I'm on to my staff, how they keep me in the office so much. When session's over, she'll be out on the road. So I've figured out one of their special tricks, although it was an especially long session this last year. Wonderful to be back in Bellingham. I was just here a few months ago with Mayor Linville, and she doesn't like me to call her mayor, but I'm sorry. My dad and mom raised me up to be a respectful young woman. She's going to, they're getting the evil eye, so I'm going to just stand this, I'm going to face this direction. Hi, everybody. Because I had the pleasure of being at the kickoff for the Bellingham Bay cleanup, the Whatcom Waterway cleanup, with our friends at the City of Bellingham, from the Lummi Nation, from all the partners that came together to start what is really going to be the largest, most comprehensive sediment cleanup in the state of Washington and in the Puget Sound. And that's an incredible accomplishment, a very exciting piece of engagement and work that you've all been engaged in. So Don, thank you for having me today. Really appreciate it. Sorry it took a while to get me up here. I'm happy to be here, and I really do love Whatcom County. It is absolutely one of those breathtaking places in the state of Washington, and I have traveled here and there. I've been in New York, I've been in Rhode Island, I've been in Massachusetts, I've been in South Dakota, I've been in New Mexico, I've been in Arizona, I've been in California, Oregon, Idaho. I've had some incredible trips in my lifetime. My folks kept me on the road a lot. We couldn't ever really afford to go to a fancy vacation in Hawaii, but by goodness, we could take a round the world kind of trip in our state in our Ford Pinto, and it was one of the bad ones with the gas tank in the back. And I was the youngest of three, and so my older brother and sister got the two back seats, and those who remember those 70s Pintos, that middle thing, that wasn't a seat. You know, that was a hump thing that was a wire, like a pole. So not really great times, so I got to jump in the back every once in a while because it was kind of like a station wagon. But in those travels, I was able to enjoy the incredible bounty and the beauty of the state, and traveled through this territory as a young person. The beautiful bays that you have, the incredible, gorgeous mountains that you have, some of the cleanest air in Washington State is being breathed here by Whatcom County community members, because you support that kind of an environment for your families, for your children, for your grandchildren, and you understand that you're living on earth that you are borrowing from our great-great-great-grandchildren, and that we all must play a part in ensuring that they can have the incredible experiences that you had when you grew up here, when you fell in love with this place and you moved here from a different state, and we'll keep you. We are keepers. All of those experiences are things that I feel and experience when I'm in Whatcom County. And to back it up, even a few months before the Bellingham Bay kickoff, I had the absolute pleasure, and will probably be one of the most memorable memories of my career, when I was asked to be the keynote speaker at the Western Washington University Huxley College for the Environment graduation ceremony this last year. And I'm here to talk to you about natural resources. Today I'm here to talk to you about the environment and the precious natural resources of our land and our air and our water. But what you are growing at Western through your students is the most incredible resource, and that is our youth that will be the next leaders, that will be the next mayor of Linville, that will be the next tribal chairman at Linville. Sorry, I'll let you have one more term, and then a Huxley grad's coming in. Mayor Linville's out. We got a new youth coming in. We'll let you cultivate those next folks. The next chairman of the Lummi Nation, of the Nooksack tribe, the next attorney for City of Bellingham, the next sustainability organization member, the next member of businesses that are trying to do the right thing in this state, the next member of our Realtors Association, the next Superior Court judge. So absolutely thrilling and touching for me to be able to have that engagement with the youth that you are cultivating and the most precious resource, which is the next generation. And I see some next generationers smiling in this very room. So hats off to you. You got a lot of work to do, young folks. So no wonder why everyone wants to move here. Such a vibrant and incredible community. And I see many people in this room that I recognize from engagement I've had in this community over the last many years. And so those of you who know me, including Dan Rass, so it's a blast from the past, nice to see you today, know that I think anything is possible. And when you believe like that, and you know that there are complex challenges ahead of us and sitting on our plates right now, that gives us the hope to be able to move forward and find solutions to those complex challenges. So not surprisingly, people come to know the Department of Ecology through a particular project that we might be reviewing, through a permit that we've issued that maybe our neighbor didn't want to be issued, or a community member is upset about, or we've been taking a while to get there. So folks see us kind of in a vacuum or this particular situation, and that's how they know us. This pending water right application. That's how we know the Department of Ecology. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the broader scope of our work. I'm looking forward to question and answers, and so I'm looking forward to having an inspiring conversation with you today. So let me start at that broader brush analysis of what the Department of Ecology does. Some refer to us as the state version of the Environmental Protection Agency. First of all, I would say we do a much better job than the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. There's 2 claps. Yay! But I would say our breadth is very, very different in terms of the work that we do. We have 10 environmental programs at the Department of Ecology. So essentially 10 small agencies under the umbrella of one large agency labeled Ecology that I have the pleasure and the honor to manage. Those range from our air quality program that I talked about, shorelands and environmental assistance, work that is done along our shoreline so we can make sure that it's done consistent with the community's view and the public interest that the community has expressed in a Shoreline Management Act. We run the spills program, so oil spills that happen either in water or on our freeways. If there's a truck we saw this morning driving up I-5, looked like a very terrible accident, and we could see folks out trying to, appears to be picking up oil and some kind of substance that had hit the ground. Our folks go out to those sites often. We run the toxics cleanup program. That's a little bit of what got us to where we're at in terms of the Whatcom County and Bellingham Bay work. Waste to resources program is really our solid waste arm of our state. We have landfills across the state. Where does our waste go? How do we manage that? How do we do it in a sustainable way that we're not years and years and years later cleaning up groundwater contamination from a landfill that wasn't put in the ground the right way or managed the right way? So we work with our local county health departments and landfills to do that work. Our water quality work that you've probably heard of a lot. You know, we have an obligation to keep our surface water and our groundwater clean, to be able to manage all those needs and all of that hit on that system and try to be consistent with the clean water standards so people have clean drinking water. So we have the ability to make sure that when we put water on our tree fruit, on our berries, that it's clean water and we're not, people aren't having health problems because of that. A lot of that is my obligation. I run the cleanup at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation. I have the nuclear waste program, the largest, most complex, dirtiest cleanup site in the world. I'm running over in the Tri-Cities area and trying to get at the very complicated nature of cleaning up strontium and chromium and other very difficult types of chemicals that were created by virtue of the Manhattan Project and the support of the Cold War and the weaponry that was developed out of that project. And our state has been paying for that for many, many years in trying to get that 540-acre piece of property back to usable property and in safe conditions. And then we have a hazardous waste program, so that deals with the really yucky of the yuckiest hazardous waste, the stuff that, you know, bubbles in drums. So we take care of that too. And ready for our last program is our one non-regulatory branch of the 10. That's called the Environmental Assessment Program. That is my group of scientists that are essentially my in-house consultants on science. Why do we do this? We have regulation after regulation after regulation, 40 laws that the legislature expects us to implement, 150 regulations and rules that we've written to try to figure out how to implement those 40 laws. And it's really nice to have scientists that aren't the ones that have to be making the regulatory decisions day in and day out about whether someone's done something right or wrong to the environment, but to simply say, we've looked at what's happening in this river, and we did these tests, and here's what the tests are telling us about what's happening in this river and what isn't. And then it's handed off to the regulatory team, then that analyzes that and says, does that trigger a regulatory action? Does that mean we should put something in place to help make this river healthier? And so that's a nice break that we have in terms of having that advice that we get and being able to implement that in the future without putting those scientists in a difficult position of feeling like they have to be the regulator. There may have to be a penalty issued. They may have to issue the order or and give them that space to be scientists. So that's something that I'm proud of in terms of how we run our agency. But guess what? We're more than regulators, and I don't want this to be the absolutely best kept secret about the Department of Ecology. We're your financial partners. And that's what you're seeing when you walk down to the Whatcom County, or the Bellingham Bay cleanup right now. That's when you see, those of you engaged in the Padden Creek daylighting project will see salmon migrating and spawning upstream, almost entirely funded by the Department of Ecology. About 73% of our budget is pass-through funds. Yay, salmon! So I think 3/4 of our budget is pass-through funds that we send to local governments, counties, towns, cities, and ports to be able to do this good work, whether it's cleaning up a legacy cleanup site, whether it's doing restoration while it's doing a floodplain by design management program so we can tell a river, you can breathe again. And letting that river breathe again means the people downstream won't be flooded and their homes destroyed and their farm have to be changed in terms of the fact that they were above an area that had a man-made change that ended up having more adverse consequences and effects in the future than we thought of at the moment when that would have benefited us. We're learning how to let the environment breathe and move so that in the end we're not paying as much on the back end for a flood response. In the end, we're not paying as much to deal with a catastrophic loss of fish during a very critical year, for example, this last year's drought. So I'm excited to say that more than $1 billion in funding to communities this past year was provided by the Department of Ecology to entities across the state of Washington. So we're improving the environment and we're creating jobs, and we're doing that in every region across the state. So we need to do a better job about telling these stories, because some of you may be a little bit surprised. I have decided to take it on, to be my challenge, that I need to hit the road and start talking about this work. There's some tough stuff. The folks don't like what we do no matter how we do it, and I just have to kind of get up every day and realize that's the case and know that I've done the best, consistent with the law and consistent with my principles of being a public servant. But a lot of the things we do are absolutely incredible things that we just don't spend time talking about. You want to know why? Because we're on to the next project. We're on to the next thing. We're down at the legislature trying to make sure we get that funding so the Bellingham Bay cleanup can keep going, and we don't take the time to stop and celebrate. Soak in the moment of kicking off that kind of a cleanup, of seeing salmon move up through the Cleelum Pool in the Yakima, the first time we've ever seen something like that in 100 years. So we must take time to celebrate and enjoy this. Know there's hard work, not think that we're all done all the time, but I'm willing to start telling those stories, and that's why I'm happy I was invited here to talk to you today. So let me tell you a little bit more about kind of my approach, my path, my vision. How I got here, yes, I spent 15 years as an assistant attorney general, mainly doing litigation at the Ecology Division of the Attorney General's office, where I represented almost all of the programs, the 10 programs I talked to you about, except this one little program called the Nuclear Waste Program. And you know what? They asked me multiple times at the AG's office, you should start being a nuke waste attorney. You come in and help us with this 16,000-page RCRA permit and help us defend this particular single shell tank transfer problem. And ooh, no, I'm not doing that. I don't have any need to get all the water resources, water quality, air quality, I'm in. But that stuff is, I can't even pronounce those words. So I get appointed by the governor on February 10th, 2013, the week of Valentine's Day. I remember it vividly. On Thursday the 14th, we get a little call from this little group called the United States of America, Department of Energy, saying, there's a huge double shell tank out at Hanford, and we've detected for the first time ever a leak inside of the annulus, I've learned to say now, which is the middle part between the inner tank and the outer tank. Never seen before, things aren't stable. That's my 4th day on the job, my 5th day on the job at a press conference with the governor. I've never been at a press conference, let alone with the governor of the state of Washington. Standing there, I get it. Nuclear waste is a big deal and we're going to clean it up. So that is some of the range of things so I go back and I visit my friends at the AG's office and they say, so you never wanted to learn nuclear waste law? So I'm in the thick of it, needless to say. I ended up having the honor and privilege to work for 2 highly respected attorney generals, Attorney General Gregoire and Attorney General McKenna, and that was a great experience for me. Really focused a lot on water rights, and in 2010, the longtime Water Resources Program Manager was getting ready to retire, and the then Director, Ted Sturdivant, who I had represented in many court cases, asked if I would shift my focus from being an attorney and a litigator and come in and help run the water program. Big shift, a big change to be an administrator of a program, and then fortunately the governor felt that I must have done okay and decided to ask me to run the other 9 programs for the agency. So that's kind of cool. So you may think my many years as an attorney and many of those years litigating cases means that we have an issue of conflict, let's go straight to court. That is absolutely the opposite view that I have. And it even wasn't consistent with the view I had while I was an attorney, because I always tried to find ways to come to a resolution before going to trial. I felt it was in everybody's best interests. And if we could save that time and energy and money finding a solution, even though everybody might not like it, that's the better way to do business. I worked on a settlement for years with some folks in this room. Heartbreaking, we were never able to get there, but that was my first priority, and maybe we'll be able to re-engage in that dialogue in the future. But I just want to make sure that you all know, I really think that we should absolutely do everything in our power as community members, as governments, as tribes, as special interest groups, as parents, as grandparents, to find a collective solution and leave the litigation as a last resort. Now, there are times where that doesn't work, and we need to have what I call a referee of our issues, and that's how I'd like to view it, is a referee coming in and helping us out. I think that if we continue to go down that road, that we'll get a lot more solutions in place a lot faster than waiting for a judge to tell us where to go. So the philosophy that has really shaped the agency's new vision statement is a lot of what I've told you. When I became director about 2.5 years ago, we reworked our vision statement, and it now reads, "Our innovative partnerships sustain healthy land, air, and water in harmony with a strong economy." The phrase that I particularly infused into that mission statement, that vision statement, is innovative partnerships. And that's because it's not just what we do and why we do it, but how we do it and with whom. And that's especially true here in Whatcom County, because you are no stranger to the tug and pull of being in a community and dealing with very broad and different interests, but you have guided a lot of your work by setting up those innovative partnerships, by reaching your hand out to the unlikely person that may not see eye to eye with you to say, let's sit down and see if we can resolve this. So I want to touch on growth right now and the fact that it has impacted and continues to impact the complexity of environmental issues in Washington, and especially here in Whatcom County. So my understanding is that you've got 23% growth since 2000. Impressive, also daunting, because you've got a tug and pull. So with all this incredible growth, this astounding growth, comes a lot of decision making about how to protect your resources, how to protect the beauty of your natural and environmental resources. And I've got another philosophy or another understanding, or maybe I should call it an insight, that when natural resources are abundant, when water is flowing, when land is available, when the air is clean, we take the environment for granted. And why? It's because we got to get our everyday stuff done. We got to keep moving. We got to move forward. We got to get up. We got to go to our work, our jobs. And there's an ability for us to take for granted and feel that it's a luxury to think about the environment. And I submit to us that we must always be vigilant about the environment, because you never know, especially the finer point being put on it this year, living in the most severe drought that we have ever faced in the recorded history of the state of Washington. That drought may go into next year. We're keeping our fingers crossed for snow. We'll probably get rain. We're seeing a little bit here today. But will that be enough to replenish our reservoirs? Will that be enough to replenish our rivers, to help our aquifers catch back up from the additional usage that happened this last summer? That remains to be seen. But what I'm saying is that we must never stand behind when we should be considering what these impacts are to our environment into the future. So this decision-making that I do, I believe in my role, the things I need to do are also to support growth in a smart way, economic development in a sustainable way for our environment, and also encourage new jobs. Make no mistake, I work for a jobs governor. He wants to make sure that when I am thinking about the work that I'm doing, I'm thinking about the broader picture and not making a decision in a vacuum necessarily, but trying to understand what it means for a community in the long run. And I believe that we can protect our very precious natural resources and make sure that what we're borrowing from our future generations will be there for them as well. So as we think about our children and our grandchildren, perhaps the most far-reaching issue affecting our future is climate change. And I'm not one to shy away from a big issue, so let's go straight into it. We're experiencing extreme weather events all around the world, all around the country. Washington State is no exception. With our worst drought and the possibility of one next year, the statistics are saying about 97% of climate scientists agree there is human contribution to this problem. When I describe it to my 11-year-old daughter, we have a few Pendleton blankets at my house, very wonderful and warm to have in the wintertime. But when it's 95 degrees, and I wrapped her in a Pendleton blanket, and I made her hold that for a bit, and said, okay, how you feeling? Kind of warm, Mom, so it's a little warm in here. I said, that's kind of what we're doing to the planet by virtue of having a lot of greenhouse gas emissions emitted into our environment. We are putting a very not so nicely decorated wool blanket over our Earth, and we're really messing with, it would be like if you had air conditioning and a heating system. We're messing with that air conditioning and heating system that the planet Earth has set up within our atmosphere. And carbon pollution is a primary connection and cause to that issue. I submit that we can provide leadership on this issue. Here in the state of Washington, we have on so many other things. And so I think that we should double down on trying to figure out resolution and ability to curb carbon emissions in this state, so that we won't be paying extraordinary costs to respond to floods, so that we won't be suffering the loss and fighting catastrophic wildfires, that we'll be able to manage our way through short-term deficits and avoid major crop losses and fish kills and wells running dry. Obviously, climate change is very important to my boss, Governor Jay Inslee, and of course it is for me, and I've seen it firsthand in my drought coordinator response role in terms of being the drought coordinator for the state of Washington. I have seen the Washington Conservation Corps members that I've had to send into the 530 and the OSO slide response and recovery area. I have seen those young people finding body parts and what they had to come back to my office to be able to rehabilitate themselves from going through such a traumatic event. I have seen sending my staff out to flood response. I have seen the tears and the devastation of lack of water and drought. And I say that we can put our best foot forward, even though we may seem small in the big picture, to say we've got leadership on this and we can support our companies and help them find other ways to do their business where they don't see problems in terms of how they ultimately have their jobs taken care of and have their people taken care of, because their people are our people. So the Clean Air Rule is something I wanted to quickly touch by. Today, Governor issued me an order to adopt moving on the path to adopt a rule that will try to get at capturing 60% of Washington State's greenhouse gas emissions. So we've analyzed all of the greenhouse gas emissions that our state emits. 60% of that is about 30 to 35 companies in the state of Washington. So 60% of our total greenhouse gas emissions are generated by about 30 to 35 companies in the state of Washington. And if you do a metric analysis, if we captured companies in Washington that emit over 100,000 metric tons of greenhouse gases, we're able to take a really good effort to try to reduce those greenhouse gases. Some of those facilities are in this county. We are working with those facilities now to get their input, to engage with them, to figure out what this means for them and how we can move forward with a potential compliance path. But these are factories, these are power plants, natural gas distributors, petroleum, fuel distributors, waste facilities, metal manufacturers. A huge landfill can put that much greenhouse gas emission out into the environment because we weren't thinking so well 50 years ago about how to maintain and deal with our solid waste. Things we're learning now and putting into place now, but we're trying to work on that into the future. Creating a rule like this, no easy process. So we immediately moved into listening sessions. We've been setting up webinars. We've been engaging with the public. Some of you, I think, in this room are engaged, and really reaching out to get information from the public about how they think we need to do this. Some of us are saying we're not being strict enough and not covering as much of the state in terms of businesses. We should include more businesses. Some are saying it's way too onerous, will be very difficult for our businesses to meet. We're taking all that input into account and working quickly. We can tell you about a couple of things we're talking about, and you can give us input on these things. We're talking about a credit approach, where if an overachiever company that's in our list of 30 or 40 has done really well, they've put energy efficiency into place, and they put a few things, maybe they're doing their manufacturing a little bit differently, and they're below their amount. They're at 90,000 metric tons. They can use their 10 and talk to a neighbor that's in the grouping that's covered to give them a little bit of help to get through a period of time where they're trying to figure out ways to be more efficient and have a less greenhouse gas emissions. Those are things we're talking about. We're talking about sponsorship programs, actual projects that could be done where, let's say, a community of 400 people say, we want to go on solar, and therefore the ultimate greenhouse gas emissions would be reduced because our carbon footprint is reduced. So can a company sponsor a project that might get energy efficiency for folks in their community and then be able to verify and provide credits for that? Do those just happen in the county of origin of the company? Do those happen in another state? Can we give credit to an activity somewhere else in the world? Those are all the complicated things we're thinking about and talking about as we work through this rule. So we'd ask you to please stay engaged. I want to quickly move to water quality and agricultural economy. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm going out and meeting with several farmers that are concerned with my move to put a draft permit out there that's called a confined animal feeding operation permit that would help us keep water cleaner in communities where we've got large livestock operations and, of course, the associated manure that is generated from those activities. And so that is a controversial issue. I've got a lot of farmers telling me they're very concerned that I'll be shutting down their business, that it'll be too onerous. And I even put a timer on my own self. Can I please have a few more minutes? Okay. Everyone, let's sit down and get comfortable. So that's a huge permit I'm working on, and it would affect many farms, and not just dairies. We're talking chicken lots, other types of lots where we've got concentrated manure lagoons, essentially, large lagoons to hold. It's perfect to talk about at lunch. And the question of, are those lagoons seeping into our groundwater source? And more importantly, are they seeping into our drinking water source? So I'm working hard on that. A particular thing that's very difficult right now is the international kind of dairy framework on things, is that the general industry is switching to larger dairies, more cows, but larger dairies, and the smaller farmers are being kind of pushed aside because it's more difficult for them to meet some of these standards, are family-owned dairies. So that is something I'm really struggling with because we have dairies that are really operating on a fine margin in terms of being able to put food on the table for their family, and they're doing the right thing. A lot of them are organic dairy farmers, for example, down in Chehalis and Raymond and other parts of the state. So I'm talking to folks. I put a draft preliminary permit out before I even need to do an official preliminary permit. The official preliminary permit will come out, I think, in December, and I want to continue to talk with folks about that. But in the context of talking about that, because the concern is also if we're over-applying manure as fertilizer on our beautiful, robust farms and berry farms here, and we get a rain event, where is that going? That goes downhill. You cannot tell water where to go. It goes downhill, it goes down gradient. And so if it's not hitting our groundwater, it is also hitting our shellfish beds. And so I owe a duty to two types of agricultural communities. Our aquaculture community, our shellfish growers, our tribal community members, and the upland farming. So no small task for me to try to get it right for everybody so that everyone can have a bountiful life and not have their quality of life affected because of maybe a shellfish closure or because of a bad actor somewhere upland that makes the rest of the farmers in between feel like they've got something that's problematic. So one cannot forget or ignore in Whatcom County the fundamental underpinning of this community. And I believe that fundamental underpinning, what has made this community so rich and given this community its ability to see things a little bit different than other communities, is the underlying Native American culture in this area and the tribes that engage with this community, the Lummi tribe and the Nooksack tribe and their work. For our time immemorial, local tribes, the Lummi and the Nooksack, have lived, they've worked, they've celebrated, they've worshipped in these lands. And they've relied on the health of our sea, of our sound, of Whatcom Bay, beyond fishing and harvesting shellfish, these are tribal ways of life. And coupled with private and commercial and moving along with the times. And so it's clear, I believe, that these tribal practices, these tribal ways, have also defined your community and that you are inextricably linked. And so reaching out hands and shaking hands and seeing if we can come to terms on some of these difficult challenges and issues, because I think if we can do that, we benefit that next generation. We benefit this young woman who maybe is going to move into an environmental arena and be able to stand up here one day and talk to you about incredible agreement was reached 15, 20 years ago that now I'm implementing to ensure that we all have access to the things that we believe are important and healthy. And so again, you're in the tug and pull, but you can make it a handshake. So really just think I better close up quickly with water resources. And then I'm gonna start negotiating each chapter of what I get to talk about. Well, let's have some fun. Let's talk about SEPA review for large coal export projects. He says that I can do that. So big, another issue I've got. Gateway in this territory, a proposed project, is planning to export up to 54 million metric tons of bulk per year. 48 million metric tons of that would be coal. If built, the Gateway Pacific Terminal would be the largest coal export terminal in the United States of America. Right now, we have two coal export projects, another one down in Cowlitz County, that is about 44 million metric tons. Those two projects together would double the export of coal from the entire United States of America. And now my job is to review the potential probable significant adverse impacts of those projects as the SEPA reviewer. I want to quickly let you know what my role is, and no decisions have been made. I am not authorized to make decisions. There's some confusion about the role as the State Environmental Policy Act lead and co-lead. The federal government is doing a National Environmental Policy Act review, very similar to our states, but it's the national laws, through the Army Corps of Engineers, coupled with the state of Washington and our county in this area asking us to also review that. So I was asked to come help review this project. Our local government could have done it on their own. That's their authority under the law. When they get a big project and they're potentially concerned about the ability to understand it and get the support and what they need, they come to us. So Whatcom County asked us to be a co-lead. My job is to provide an objective, thorough analysis of the potential impacts of these projects. And so I want you to know it's not a permit. The SEPA review is an environmental review. When you go to buy your house, typically you hire an inspector, right? To make sure you're getting what you're paying for. That inspector says this here, some ants did something to your porch here, the roof on this side has got some problems, we found some leaking in this window, it's not fully sealed, but they're not making a decision. They then hand it to you, and then you make the decision about how you want to bargain those issues. If you want to mitigate for them, take care of those issues in advance. If you want to ask for the home seller to reduce the cost of the property to make up for those things. What we're doing is that inspection. We're looking at these issues. We're analyzing from a technical perspective the potential impacts to eelgrass beds, to wetlands, air quality issues from potential coal dust, noise and vibration. We look at very interesting things in terms of the movement of the product. Nearshore habitat, shading. We look at what the changes in shade will mean, and this is a big deal. Groundwater monitoring, stormwater monitoring, the oil spill fate and transportation analysis, the vehicle safety and vessel traffic analysis, the rail impacts on vehicle traffic. Very huge, complex analysis that we're doing. And then at the end of the day, any federal government or state or local government that has a permit that's triggered for the building of the facility, the wharf, et cetera, they then use that information to make their decision. And that's where we're at. We're in the draft environmental impact review process to be able to provide that information to you as the public and to your local officials so that they can have the best information available to them as they make this decision. And so I take this job very seriously, and I want to provide the best information as possible, and I'm trying to move as quickly as I can based on the resources that I have, and do a service to your community, because many of you provided comments to us during the scoping period. We received 125,000 comments. Unheard of. 225 for my project down south of here. And so just wanted to let you know, it's unprecedented for us to get 250,000 comments on a project. We have to sort through those, we have to respond to those, we have to analyze those, and we are trying to do our very most fair, utmost robust process that we can, so that your community can have this information. And lastly, water resources. Huge issue here, and I've got many friends in the room I'm working with on this and will continue to work with. We live in the Western water law construct of first in time, first in right, prior appropriation. It was based on the mining laws from the California gold rush era, where if you had your stake, you ran for your land and you put it in the land, and now that was your plot. Was little easier to deal with that when you knew there were only so many miles of land, right? Because once all the last stakes got out, that's it, we're done. And people could see it and feel it and smell it. Water was based in our state in 1917 under the same code. 17 or 18, 19 Western United States members did the same, all the way to Nebraska. When you claim water, you presume it is infinite because it's raining, because the stream continues to flow, because you put a straw in the ground and it just comes out. It is not true. Our water, although it replenishes itself, is finite. There's only so much of it to go around. There are cases in the state that say tribes that have a treaty right, for the treaty right to take fish, are entitled to have water for that treaty right, and have a time immemorial, is the term that's used, right. Also have rights for on the land and the ability to live and clean and have economic development and those things. Those may not be adjudicated officially in this county. It is adjudicated in Yakima, and that's why living through the drought in the Yakima Basin, you would think, oh my God, no. Because the Yakima Nation has an adjudicated surface water right on the Yakima Basin, we were able to more quickly figure out drought solutions for some of the non-tribal water users, because the Yakima Nation knew what theirs was, knew what they were protecting, everyone else knew. We'd figure out ways to do it, and they were generous in allowing complex and creative mitigation solutions to help get a farmer off the surface water to save a fish and onto a groundwater source and not use as much as they would technically and legally potentially be entitled to. So we are in a very small box in terms of how we do water resources management. I continue to lose Supreme Court cases, one after the other. I just filed a motion for reconsideration on a case down in Yelm, Olympia, Lacey, very complex water right that the Nisqually tribe actually thought was good decision-making because it put a good restoration and salmon recovery on the ground. But because of a way that the law is interpreted, the Supreme Court said that I went beyond my bounds and should have never granted a mitigation right that wasn't water for water. So it was this much water was being taken from the system, and take off my pinky top, and that much water going back. And because this much was not water, it was shading, it was restoration, it was a conservation easement, it was buying and retiring other water rights, didn't quite equal exactly the amount that was taken out of the system. Supreme Court says, can't do it. I think I should be entitled to a little flexibility. However, I understand that I do need to protect those in-stream reserve rights. Fish are important. We have endangered species in the state. We have expatriated species from the state. We have recreational users of our water saying we want to be able to give our child the experience to float down a beautiful river and think that some water river should be there in the summer. So I have some complex issues. I have a challenge in trying to bring those issues together and find resolution for this community and thinking about all those different interests. And I'm absolutely proud to be here, to be in front of you, to make my commitment to this community, to continue to work hard on these issues. And it's absolutely an honor. Thank you for time with me this afternoon. Well, now the fun part, so.
Right, so we'll have questions as usual, and remember the key word is questions, not big statements or whatever. So we have two people who will be around the room, Chuck and Jane, and so raise your hand, please. And our policy is we have members ask questions first. If no members are left to have questions, then others will be able to ask questions. So I'll acknowledge you. Please, we're recording this, so don't speak until there's a microphone in front of your face. So, questions now.
Okay.
Is this on? Okay, it is on. All right, thanks. I have a specific question, and you talked about it generally. What's the Department of Ecology doing to develop a long-term solution to the problem of illegal water use in Whatcom County? A solution that ensures the viability of farmers and improves environmental quality, especially for the fish listed under the and threatened under the Endangered Species Act.
Yeah, so that is huge, and we do need to have a plan. I mean, I believe, started watershed planning in this community in, 1998, and weren't able to bring it to the finish line. The State Department of Ecology worked very closely with several large water users, including the city of Bellingham and my friends here at Whatcom County PUD, to try to come up with some of those resolutions. It's very difficult because what are your options? In a clean way to do business, pre-Columbian, we would have figured out how much waters are running in these rivers and how much is in the groundwater. And then we would have had our incredibly brilliant scientists say how much of this can be peeled off the top and used for other out-of-stream purposes, and know what that parameter was. That's not how it happened, because pre-1917, the claims were staked. In 1917, the permitting law went into effect. The permits started getting issued. The understanding of the continuity between ground and surface water wasn't as clear as it is now. And we have, I believe, 6,000 pending water right applications in just this county, the largest pending of any in the state. Why? Because there hasn't been water available to provide to those people, and instead of turning them away, they're in a holding pattern because of this priority date system, which says the day you file your application is the seniority of your water right. And if your water right is a 1970 application and you end up getting approval, and you're a 1990 application, you're junior, and when water is short, that 1970 water right holder can call the system and say, sorry, the juniors have to stop taking. That's why it's such a complex issue, because it's a have and a have-not environment. And so we need to put a plan into place. We need to start reaching out to our partners. An adjudication doesn't seem likely at this point in time in terms of a big picture adjudication like we did in the Yakima. That's been a 30-year plus adjudication, costing us over $40 million. This one would be very similar. And we're very smart now. In the Yakima, we only adjudicated surface water. Groundwater is connected to that. You've seen what's happened in California. Have you heard that the floor valley in the Central Valley, the actual elevation of the ground is shrinking? I mean, it's going down. It's de-elevating. Is that a word? It's sinking. That's simple. Why? California established an only surface water permitting program. It was a race to the bottom on groundwater. Folks have some gripes with me and our code, but in 1945, our legislature had the wisdom to say, we think this groundwater has something to do with everything's connected. So we want ecology to start thinking about how it issues those water rights. We don't willy-nilly issue water rights. We're trying to figure out how much is in the system and make those approvals at the time. Yes, there are people using water. And we've been starting to work to systematically either get those folks legal or tell them they need to find a different way of doing business or work with their neighbor to share or split a water right. But we've got a lot of work to do in that area, and we missed the boat by not having an adjudication like happened in Eastern Washington in several places in the 1920s and 1928 and I think 1924 is when the Dungeness adjudicated their water right. Much easier scenario. But several leadership positions ago, a leader came to this area because people were not only concerned that they were illegal, but they were afraid that they would immediately get penalties and some terrible action would occur to them and their family. And that leader said, if you come in and file an application and let us know you're out there and what you're using, we will withhold taking an action and try to find a solution for you. How many years later, and we're still talking about this, and I still don't have a silver bullet for a solution. So we've got a ton of work to do, and the more we work together on it, it'll help this community in the future. Hi, Barry.
Hi, what a great segue. I don't know if you'd recognize me. I've been gone for several years. I started with the Department of Ecology in 1986. Some of the first people I met in top of Barron Hall, which was one of the 17 buildings the agency was in, were the water rights people working on the Yakima.
Yep.
So it takes forever. My question kind of relates to the relationship between surface water and groundwater, and actually, surface water, groundwater and surface water as far as wells withdrawing water and affecting a stream, especially a salmon stream. And what I'd like to know actually is now, do we have enough information, let's say, I'm sure not in the whole basin, but say in a smaller drainage, say at Anderson Creek, one of the non-snow influenced creeks in the lowlands, to be able to look at wells and the geology and the superficial geology and figure out and do a model to figure out, does this well really affect the stream? And if it doesn't affect the stream, can they get some sort of blessing?
Right. So I can't attest to the fact that we have that information everywhere. We've got the ability to get that information, and sure enough, when we go in, we target areas where we're going to make those groundwater types of decisions, and we try to pull modeling together. We try to get the best information to figure out what that is. Is it going to affect the stream? Is it not? Is it a different aquifer that then is in continuity with a different stream that's much more robust and doesn't have problems? So we definitely try to take that into account on the bigger permits. But the complex issue we have is we have, I believe, over 400,000 permit-exempt wells in the state of Washington. Those are the wells that never needed to go through a permit because they're for a smaller use, for a home, and maybe for a small, less than 5,000 gallons a day. Now, permit-exempt wells in Whatcom County, I think, don't exceed 2% of the water use in this entire county. So it's not like we've got an alarming rate of 50% of those wells that are unpermitted because the law doesn't require them to have a permit are taking water from the groundwater. But we have larger permit requests that come in where we try to do just that thing, which is model it, figure out if there's an issue, and if there is, let's try to find out a mitigation package so that we can try to say yes to a portion of that. But sometimes we simply just have to say no when there is a connection. Thank you.
Hello, thank you.
Hi.
Can you speak to the local versus global scope of the EIS being performed for the Gateway Pacific Terminal?
So, yeah, and I think, what we're getting at is we've got many issues we're looking at locally, which we need to. The health impacts are a big issue of that. So trying to figure out, like I said, the coal dust issue. That's a whole different complex issue for us. And we could have borrowed data from some other state all the way on the East Coast. Does that mirror how our air moves, where our community lives, where they live vis-a-vis this potential impact? So we needed to be specific and get that information. We are looking at a lot of the localized issue in terms of wetlands, eelgrass, those things. But outside of the context of the site, the county, and the state, because we're looking at rail through the state, all of those things, looking at the time that people would have to wait at an intersection if the only emergency room is on this side of that railroad. Those are things that we're looking at. But we also are, based on the authority that the Washington State Legislature has provided us under the State Environmental Policy Act, looking at what we are trying to analyze are the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions. Not just here in this county and not just in the state of Washington, but do those stay here? Right. We're trying to figure out what's going on and what our contribution is overall. It's very complex. It's not just a matter of doing the math. This many million metric tons times X emission rate, and there it is. Done. You can do that on the back of a napkin and think that you have done a SEPA review. Absolutely contrary to the situation we're in. We're studying things to understand the coal market, because a coal market analysis helps us think about predicting whether or not there'll be an increase in greenhouse gas emissions or where there'll be an offset that someone will use this coal and stop using a different kind of coal, and therefore what is that in total amount. So there are a lot of different things we're looking at and analyzing. We're in the middle of that technical review with GPT right now, and the consultants that were hired by the coal leads the Army Corps of Engineers, Department of Ecology, and Whatcom County to do that analysis. But, you know, we felt it was logical to assess coal combustion given the volume and nature of the product, and we're pleased that the federal government is following our lead now on other rail projects that they're seeing, especially in Montana. We think it's fair for the public to know you asked for this review in the scoping and the public review that we got the 125,000 comments on. And I will say that the company has not necessarily been reticent. They have provided information, and we're doing this review. So that's what our thinking is. And glad to see you here in this room.
I'd like to go back to a question on the water rights. It seems like we've been talking about this issue for at least 30-something years that I've been in this community. And my understanding is staffing levels have been reduced significantly, and I know it takes a long time to resolve a water right. Is that true? And if so, is there anything that we can do as a community or as voters to support increasing staffing so that we can get this resolved?
So yeah, our staffing fluctuates. Why? The Water Resources Program of the 10 programs is the most reliant on the state general fund, which is the general taxpayer fund in our state. Others have more dedicated accounts that certain taxes go into, but this is when the general fund, when the economy is up and the revenue is up, we're able to do pretty good. When we're in a recession, yes, we get cuts. We've been hanging in there with our staff, but I would love to add more staff doing water resources work across the state of Washington because this is so important, and I think it is one of the pivotal issues of our future. There's not anything we can do if we don't have water and not figure out how to use it. We can't run a hospital, we can't run a public school, we can't run a pharmacy, we can't run a fish hatchery. If we don't have a more comprehensive way of dealing with this, it is problematic. So if the legislature tomorrow handed me $40 million to adjudicate this basin, we'd all be having a big, interesting little legal engagement.
Yeah, hi, I'm a small organic farmer on Lummi Island. I'm also an ag economist that I'm quite concerned about, or I'm interested in the viability and the competitiveness of our dairy industry. And as you know, our farmers are in a very competitive industry, and they go head-to-head with those New Zealand farmers. Huh?
Right.
That's the context. I want to ask you about the CAFO regulations. And Whatcom County is not Yakima. Huh? And you talk to the dairy farmers here, and they're absolutely clear how important clean water is for productive and healthy animals. Otherwise, they're out of business. Huh? You noted, you know what flows downhill. And also, I want to note that in this county, all of our farmers are under the nutrient management plan now. And they've all got lagoons that were designed and approved by the NRCS. Okay. The dairy farmers, ask your staff, Richard Moore, or Bill Moore, what's the basis for the CAFO regulations? Huh?
Okay.
And he said, we have no basis. Huh? So if there's no basis, if your science staff doesn't support that finding, are you still going to move ahead with the draft proposal for CAFO regulations? Huh?
So we are moving forward. I find it awkward that Bill Moore would say there is no basis. I mean, we've got a lot of studies across the state that talk about and show seepage from inappropriately managed lagoons, manure lagoons, and or over-application of fertilizer on fields. Now, what we're not doing is running out and saying everybody has to do something to change their practices. This first phase of work that we're doing is trying to find out who's done it right and to say, is that water body protected and is it in good shape? And if it is, great. If it's not, we need to go in and find those situations and work with our partners in the dairy community to try to get those types of lagoons adjusted in a way that protects our drinking water.
Question from our program committee. In terms of the water quality standards, and you're in the process of adopting a new standard for fish consumption rate, and you could explain your answer, but the federal EPA has a more strict standard than what you're proposing. So how are you moving in terms of reconciling those two differences?
So we are in the process of updating over a 20-year-old fish consumption rate, which is the calculation, the algorithm that we put into our clean water laws to determine how clean the water must be for people to safely consume a certain amount of fish out of those water bodies. We have very high fish-consuming populations in the state of Washington, and our rate was 6.5 grams per day. And 6.5 grams is about that much fish on a Ritz cracker. And it doesn't cover the Ritz, the full Ritz, just in the middle. Didn't seem plausible to us, including studies that we had received from tribes in terms of the high consuming fish populations within our tribal communities. So the governor has adjusted that in the formula in our draft that we're going to be putting out here soon to 175 grams a day, which means you can safely eat fish from Washington waters if you're eating about a serving of fish a day. Now, I will tell you this formula is based on eating fish from the same water body, the exact same water body from the same place for 70 years, every single day of your life at 175 grams. So it's a calculation and it's a risk model. It's a theoretical risk model. So we are trying to honor the fact that we, have a lot of fish eating populations in our state, and so that number is being adjusted. EPA thinks we've been going too slow, didn't like a first version of the rule that we put out, and because it's a federally delegated water quality program, that means it's a federal program, it's a federal law, that Washington has the authority to implement if we do it right. Their signal to us is you were not doing it right, and you were doing it too slow. So several months ago, they did what's called an overfiling of a draft rule that only adjusted the algorithm but didn't do anything else to help us have ways to engage with MPDES, these discharge permit holders, on how they would adjust their system to meet the standards in the future. And we call those implementation tools, different ways to help folks get to compliance without instantly being deemed to be having an illegal diversion. So we're putting together a package that honors a high fish consumption rate at a 10 to the minus 6, 1 in a million cancer risk rate, and changes other parts of the formula to adjust to what we think is right for Washington, but also to be able to work with businesses and industries and towns and cities that have wastewater discharge permits that will also have to meet this criteria. We think we've got a good package moving forward. We'll be rolling out the draft sometime in December.
Let's thank her for her
Thank you,
presentation
everybody.
once again.